The night I entered the wrong ICU room at St. Matthew's Medical Center in Denver, Colorado, I thought I had just made a small mistake at the end of an exhausting shift. Instead, that quiet, accidental moment became the turning point that reshaped my heart, my career, and my entire understanding of what it means to be human. I had been running on caffeine and grief after losing my younger brother months earlier, struggling to stay present while every hospital corridor echoed with memories I wanted to escape. The fluorescent lights hummed above me as machines beeped in distant rooms, and I remember thinking that I felt just as empty as the long hallway stretching ahead. That was when I pushed open a door I believed belonged to my assigned patient, unaware that one wrong step would lead me into a story I would carry for the rest of my life. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet power of human connection, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel before we continue, because stories like this remind us how deeply our small actions can matter. Inside the room lay a woman named Grace Henderson, though I did not know her name at the time. Her chart was clipped at the end of the bed, and I noticed immediately that the visitor's chair was empty and untouched. Tubes and wires surrounded her fragile body, and the stillness in the air felt heavier than any silence I had known. I later learned she had been in a coma for nearly 3 months after a car accident on a snowy highway outside Boulder. With no listed family contacts and no visitors, she had become another quiet figure in the ICU, monitored by nurses but untouched by the warmth of familiar voices. I had been searching for my assigned patient, but exhaustion and grief blurred my focus, and instead of stepping back into the hallway, I lingered. Something about the loneliness of that room mirrored my own emptiness, and for the first time that night, I felt a strange urge to stay. At first, I simply checked the monitors and adjusted the blanket, convincing myself that I was just being thorough. But the silence pressed against me, and memories of my brother flooded my mind, reminding me of how music had once been our escape from pain. Without thinking too much about it, I began to hum softly. The melody was one my brother and I used to sing together during long car rides, a simple tune that carried warmth and nostalgia. My voice felt fragile at first, shaky with emotion, but as the seconds passed, I allowed the song to flow freely through the sterile room. I sang not for a patient I knew, but for the emptiness I felt inside myself, hoping that maybe sound could fill a space that medicine could not reach. Days passed, and I found myself returning to that room whenever I had a moment between rounds. I learned her name from the chart and began thinking of her not as a stranger but as someone who deserved presence. The hospital remained busy and unforgiving, filled with emergencies and heartbreak, yet those brief moments of singing became my refuge. I battled guilt over my brother's death and struggled with doubts about whether I had chosen the right profession, but Grace's stillness allowed me to slow down. Even though there were no visible changes in her condition, I felt less alone each time I sang. Some coworkers questioned why I spent extra time with a patient who showed no response, but I could not explain the quiet bond forming in a room where words were unnecessary. One rainy afternoon, as thunder rolled across the Denver skyline, I noticed a subtle movement in Grace's fingers while I sang. At first, I thought exhaustion had created an illusion, but the monitors confirmed a shift in her vital signs. Over the next week, small changes continued. Her eyelids fluttered briefly, and her breathing patterns altered, causing the medical team to reassess her prognosis. I struggled with disbelief, afraid to hope too much, yet every time I sang, there seemed to be a faint response. The hospital staff began observing my visits with cautious curiosity, and I realized that what had started as an accident had turned into something that defied logic and statistics. The morning she finally opened her eyes felt unreal. Sunlight filtered through the blinds as I sang softly, and suddenly her gaze focused on the ceiling before drifting toward my silhouette. The moment was quiet and fragile, filled with uncertainty and awe. Nurses rushed in, doctors assessed her condition, and the once-forgotten room became the center of cautious celebration. Although her recovery was slow and filled with challenges, Grace's awakening sparked conversations throughout the hospital about human connection and the role of emotional presence in healing. For me, it was a moment of redemption, proof that even when I felt broken, I still had something meaningful to offer. As weeks turned into months, Grace began physical therapy and speech rehabilitation. She learned that I had entered her room by mistake, and although she did not remember the songs, she told the staff she felt a strange sense of comfort during her coma, as if someone had been guiding her back toward life. Her recovery forced me to confront my own grief and to realize that healing is rarely a straight path. I started volunteering to sit with patients who had no visitors, discovering that the simple act of being present could change both the caregiver and the patient. Grace's resilience reminded me that even in moments of profound isolation, human connection can serve as a lifeline. Before we reach the ending, I want to ask something special from you watching right now. Please take a moment to comment with a small act of kindness you have witnessed or experienced, because sharing those stories helps keep compassion alive in a world that often feels rushed and disconnected. Your words might inspire someone else who is struggling to keep going. Months later, Grace walked out of the hospital with the help of a cane and a determined smile. I stood at the doorway watching her leave, feeling a sense of closure that I had not felt since my brother's passing. Her journey inspired me to create a volunteer program focused on emotional support for patients without families, bringing music and conversation into rooms that once felt forgotten. The accidental moment that began with a wrong turn had transformed into a mission that gave my life renewed purpose. I realized that sometimes our greatest impact comes from mistakes that lead us exactly where we are needed most. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of the power of kindness, please engage with this video by liking, commenting, and sharing it with someone who needs a reminder that small actions can change lives. Your support helps keep stories like this alive and encourages others to believe in compassion even during the hardest times. As I look back on that quiet ICU room, I no longer see it as a place of sorrow but as the space where two broken lives found unexpected healing. Grace's recovery changed my perspective forever, teaching me that even when we feel lost, a single act of presence can spark a transformation that echoes far beyond one moment, one room, or one life.